The Vatican didn't fear the Knights Templar for their swords, they feared the rival scripture they protected. That scripture never vanished. It was hidden in a code of stone and blood, a secret pact passed down through the centuries that has quietly guided the course of history. The conventional historical record states that Solomon's temple was obliterated ages ago, becoming nothing more than dust beneath Jerusalem and leaving behind only a spiritual symbol and a faint mention in Scripture. A persistent, unsettling rumor, however, hides just beneath this accepted tale, whispering of hidden chambers deep below the visible rubble that were never truly lost. For centuries, these very chambers seem to live on within the legends shared between knightly brotherhoods and secret societies. Welcome to Mythic Index, a sanctuary for lost legends and forgotten timelines. Here, we peel back the layers of history to reveal the myths that shaped our world, from the shadows of the underworld to the secrets written in the stars. If you wish to ensure you can always find your way back to this archive, please subscribe now. If the sanctuary was indeed consumed by fire and conflict, it begs the question of why its rituals, symbols, and architectural elements keep resurfacing, as if the entire blueprint for Solomon's great work was intentionally kept alive in the shadows. The Knights Templar, established early in the 12th century, famously took up residence directly upon the ruins of the Temple Mount. While official accounts label this a practical arrangement offered by a king, a simple coincidence, the whole affair feels suspiciously deliberate. Practically overnight, this order of knights transformed from being mere protectors of pilgrims into guardians of something far more profound. They acquired wealth and influence with a speed that seemed to violate all the norms of feudal society. Rumors quickly spread that they had discovered something profound beneath the temple's foundations, perhaps ancient texts or powerful relics that were sealed in the mythical vaults rumored to exist under the old stones. What if these vaults held the key to a Solomonic Code? This wouldn't be simple scripture, but a master design, a formula that united heaven and earth in a pattern of immense power. This single possibility challenges the very foundation of the official history. If a code like that was real, then the Templars' meteoric ascent stops being a historical anomaly and instead becomes the logical outcome of reclaiming lost knowledge. History explains the order's rise as a product of good fortune, but the suppressed suspicion suggests it was the result of Solomon's Code. This is the theory that is never spoken aloud, but also never completely goes away. Centuries later, long after a papal decree shattered their order, the rumor lived on. Something was found beneath the temple's stones that no crown, cross, or command could ever fully suppress. The image of Solomon's temple, therefore, evolved beyond architecture to become a powerful symbol. It stood as a beacon for an unbroken chain of wisdom, one believed to predate empires and even the major faiths that claimed divine authority. To honor the temple was to honor the very concepts of sacred geometry, divine proportion, and secret pacts. This was the powerful image the Templars embraced, and it was this same image that the Freemasons would later claim as their own, hinting that both organizations were simply different phases of a single, continuous secret covenant. If that's true, the story of the temple's demise is merely a cover story. Beneath it lies an unbroken legacy, purposefully hidden but carried on by those with the wisdom to recognize the signs. Consider standing on the Temple Mount, a place of contested stones and fragmented ruins. The devout see it as holy ground. The historian sees it as a site of disputed history. But to an initiate, it is the location of a legendary vault that was never truly plundered, a place where knowledge was kept safe in silence, protected by the earth until the right people arrived to claim it. The Templars are said to have breached those chambers and to have left with designs and documents capable of reshaping entire kingdoms. This could be why their order grew so far beyond the control of the kings and popes who first sanctioned it. They were no longer just soldiers, they had become the keepers of a code. And a code is nothing less than a bridge connecting different worlds, a symbolic language that uncovers hidden links. The Solomonic Code, if it existed, was never meant to be a simple set of laws or holy writings. It would have been a blueprint for reality itself, a grand design of proportions that mirrored the cosmos, encoded into stone, numbers, and ritual. Such a code could influence the destiny of anyone who understood it, bestowing power not through military might alone, but by aligning human will with the universe's grand design. An inheritance of this magnitude would make secrecy an absolute necessity. Knowledge of this nature could not be preached from a pulpit or taught in a university. It needed to be concealed, encoded, and shared through whispers, symbols, ritual oaths, and hidden architecture, awaiting discovery by those chosen to inherit it. The Templars, therefore, became more than just an order. They were a conduit, a vessel for an ancient and powerful current. Their incredible wealth, their unparalleled independence, and their capacity to unnerve kings and frighten the Vatican. All of it seems less shocking when seen not as mere earthly success, but as the powerful resonance of a rediscovered secret. Before we drift deep into the ancient past, take a second to tap the like button. Think of it as lighting a candle in this digital hall, helping other weary travelers find their way to these stories. To understand that resonance, we have to look at how a small band of knights became one of the most powerful forces in Europe, seemingly overnight. According to surviving accounts, the Knights Templar were born not from a grand legend, but from a simple, practical need. Their mission started with just a handful of men who had taken a vow to safeguard pilgrims on dangerous roads, beginning with very little money and even less influence. Yet within just a few decades, that humble group transformed into a global institution of enormous wealth and authority, powerful enough to stand shoulder to shoulder with monarchs. While traditional history credits this to generous donors and smart financial decisions, the sheer velocity and scale of their growth feels like something more was at play. What if their strength wasn't just fueled by gold from patrons, but by an ancient inheritance they unearthed from beneath the Temple of Solomon? Persistent legends claim that in their early days, the Templars conducted extensive excavations deep under the Temple Mount, tunneling into forgotten ruins. Publicly, their duty was to guard the holy ground, but their activities hinted at a secret search. Were they looking for legendary artifacts like the Ark of the Covenant, or perhaps scrolls hidden by ancient priests who foresaw an impending invasion? The most profound possibility, however, is that they sought the direct instructions of Solomon himself, a foundational code of geometry and cosmic alignment that would allow its user to command both worldly and heavenly power. A prize like that would be far more valuable than any relic. It would be a blueprint for building empires and directly challenging the Church's supreme authority. When seen from this angle, the Order's miraculous transformation makes a lot more sense. A poor band of soldiers doesn't just morph into a continent-spanning network of power in a single generation without an extraordinary catalyst. The Templars certainly received land and favors, but their accomplishments went far beyond what simple patronage could explain. Their unique architecture showed a mastery of sacred geometry. Their revolutionary banking system suggested a grasp of hidden principles, and their very organization perfectly balanced secrecy with public duty. These were the achievements of guardians, not common warriors, as if they were operating from a blueprint lost to time. While the Order was at its peak, unsettling rumors began to circulate. Pilgrims whispered of the knights venerating strange figures and performing secret rites behind closed doors. Kings grew jealous of their vast fortune, but were also terrified of their autonomy, as no monarch could truly command them. Even the Vatican, which had initially sanctioned the Order, became deeply suspicious, sensing the Templars' allegiance was split. It's possible their ultimate vow was not to the Church, but to a much older covenant they believed they had rediscovered, the Solomonic Pact. This would make the Pact the unbroken thread connecting ancient Jerusalem's wisdom to the rise of Europe's most mysterious order. What's truly incredible is how their influence survived their own downfall. After the Pope, pressured by indebted kings, branded them heretics and officially disbanded the order, their story didn't end. Countless Templars simply vanished, blending into other organizations and carrying their secrets and symbols with them. The fires may have consumed the men, but the memory, the code, endured. If it was real, this knowledge flowed onward like a hidden river, searching for a new vessel, until centuries later, the Freemasons emerged with startlingly similar rituals and symbols, suggesting a continuity that is hard to ignore. That deep connection might explain the Vatican's dramatic change of heart. Once celebrated as devout warriors and protectors of the faithful, the Templars suddenly became an object of fear for the very institution that created them. This wasn't a slow decline, it was an abrupt shift from ally to threat. The cause wasn't failure in battle or fading relevance. Instead, unsettling whispers began to circulate through the halls of power, suggesting the Knights answered to an authority higher than the Pope. For the Vatican, which asserted universal spiritual dominion, this was an intolerable challenge. It could handle powerful kings and wealthy orders, but it could not abide a rival claim to sacred truth. The official charges brought against the order, heresy, blasphemy, and obscene rituals, were a chaotic jumble of accusations. They seemed designed more to create a public spectacle of scandal than to pinpoint a specific crime. This inconsistency hints that the Templars' true offense was something the Church could not afford to name. Could it be that the Knights had discovered a source of knowledge that fundamentally challenged the Vatican's monopoly on the divine? Admitting such a thing would have shattered Christendom. So the mystery was buried under a mountain of scandal, and the Knights' voices were silenced by fire. This brings up a crucial question. Why would the Pope risk so much political instability to dismantle an order that had been so incredibly useful? The most compelling answer is that their usefulness had evolved into a rivalry. With their independent command structure, immense wealth, and secretive practices, the Templars began to operate like a second, parallel church. This was an institution that drew its power not from Rome, but from a hidden pact rumored to have been discovered in Jerusalem. The Vatican's growing alarm wasn't just paranoia. It was the recognition that it was facing guardians of a code it could neither decipher nor control. This silent rivalry surfaced in countless small ways. Chroniclers noted that even while in Rome, the Templars' first allegiance always seemed to be to their own grandmaster, not to papal representatives. Their vast fortune rarely flowed into the Vatican's coffers. Their symbolism, while featuring the cross, was often interwoven with geometric patterns that echoed far older pre-Christian traditions. To the average observer, this was peculiar. To the Church, it was a declaration of independence. It seemed the order no longer served papal authority, but instead answered to a deeper, more ancient Solomonic power. The ferocity of their destruction under Pope Clement V reveals the depth of this fear. Kings coveted the Templars' gold, but the Vatican seemed to want their very memory erased. The trials were a sham, with forced confessions leading to the Grand Master being burned at the stake. If this were merely about wealth, confiscating their assets would have been enough. Instead, the goal was the complete annihilation of their identity. The Church wasn't just seizing land, it was trying to extinguish a current of thought. But an idea, a code embedded in symbols, architecture, and secret oaths, cannot be destroyed by fire. It simply goes underground, waiting for a new generation to carry the torch. And so, the conflict between the Church and the Code didn't end with the Templars. Rumors of survivors being absorbed into other secretive fraternities meant their knowledge was now flowing through the hidden bloodstream of Europe. The Vatican, though publicly victorious, was left with a lingering uncertainty. Had the Solomonic Pact truly been broken? Legends persist even now of sealed archives deep within Rome, containing seized Templar documents deemed too dangerous to ever be made public. The Vatican's continued silence on the matter is, perhaps, the only answer we need. This profound fear would echo for centuries. When the Freemasons rose to prominence, they faced waves of papal condemnation for the exact same reasons: secrecy, hidden allegiances, and heresy. It was as if the Church recognized the same rival thread weaving its way through history. The Vatican learned it could burn men, but it couldn't burn geometry. It couldn't burn a memory. It could not destroy the code itself. The confrontation simply became a repeating cycle of suppression and survival. We are told that history is set in stone, yet so much remains buried in the sand. If you believe there are truths about our past that are still waiting to be uncovered, just type the word "hidden" in the comments. It serves as a quiet signal that you are listening. And that very cycle gave rise to a silent war fought not with swords, but with symbols. Two competing sources of power stood in stark opposition, creating a fundamental rivalry. The Vatican's legitimacy was rooted in apostolic succession, a chain of authority passed down through faith and official decree. But the Templars and the Freemasons who followed drew their power from an entirely different source: the divine proportions of King Solomon's temple, a code reflecting heaven on earth. One source of authority demanded faith and submission to the word of the Pope. The other was built on understanding and recognizing an ancient, universal code. To the average person, these might have looked like two different paths to the same God. For those who understood, however, they were fundamentally incompatible. The chasm between submitting to faith and recognizing a code is a difference no papal bull could ever hope to bridge. What's truly fascinating is the Vatican's ultimate failure to stamp out the philosophy it so deeply feared. In a twist of irony, the very cathedrals built to celebrate its power are filled with the sacred geometry it publicly condemned. Every soaring arch and every vaulted ceiling contains echoes of a code believed to originate with Solomon himself. It poses a startling question. Did the Church, in its quest to destroy this rival ideology, inadvertently become its greatest preserver? This paradox is at the heart of the story. By trying to erase the Solomonic Code, the Vatican ended up carving it into stone all across the Christian world. The bitter rivalry became an unintentional, undeniable partnership. Faith and code began to coexist within the very buildings meant to project the singular authority of the Pope, leaving behind a legacy of deep unease. The Vatican condemned what it could not admit it feared, and it absorbed what it could not destroy. And so, the Solomonic Code lives on, hidden in plain sight across Europe, a silent testament visible only to those who can read the signs. The rivalry was never settled, the memory never faded, and the pact was never truly broken. This simmering tension suggests a radical idea. Perhaps the real guiding force of history wasn't the Church, but the secret code it tried and failed to eliminate. Symbols have a unique power to communicate where words fail, carrying ideas across centuries even after documents are destroyed and their keepers are silenced. The Templar cross, the Masonic square and compass, and the geometric patterns etched into cathedral walls might seem to come from entirely separate worlds. And yet, their connection to the imagery of Solomon's temple is far too exact to be a mere coincidence. Ancient texts describing the temple ruins speak of two great pillars named Jachin and Bose, representing balance and stability. These are directly mirrored by the twin columns found in every Masonic lodge today. How could such a specific detail reappear across a vast expanse of time unless a single, hidden stream of knowledge was flowing beneath the surface of accepted history? Take the simple red cross worn by the Templars. While many historians argue it was nothing more than a badge of faith, its precise geometry and consistent placement hint at a much deeper significance, resonating with ancient principles of sacred proportion. Centuries later, the Freemasons would adopt the square and compass, tools of a builder, yes, but also powerful symbols of aligning earthly creations with a heavenly blueprint. When you place the cross and the compass side by side, a conversation begins. It's a dialogue between sacrifice and geometry, where faith is woven together with a divine code. In that conversation, you can hear the unmistakable echo of Solomon's temple, a structure designed not just for worship, but as the physical embodiment of cosmic order, the ultimate meeting point between heaven and earth. Even more bizarre are the architectural themes shared by both groups. The great cathedrals, commissioned to celebrate papal authority, are hiding a secret. A closer look at their stained glass windows and stone carvings reveals symbols that don't belong, not images of Christ, but of the temple, of compasses, of stars, and of geometry. It's as if the builders, many of whom were part of the Mason guilds, embedded a second language into these sacred spaces. This language was illegible to the masses, but spoke volumes to those initiated into the Solomonic Pact. A single cathedral could therefore serve two masters simultaneously. For the faithful, it was a house of God. For the initiated, it was a constant, coded reminder of a covenant far older than Rome. This persistence of symbols creates a difficult paradox. If the Vatican condemned the Templars for heresy, why does their symbolic language survive and even thrive within the very architecture the Church itself sanctioned? The answer might lie in quiet infiltration, or perhaps something more profound. The idea that once a powerful truth is uncovered, it can never truly be erased. It can only be disguised, woven into the very structures that outlast empires. The Solomonic Code didn't need scrolls or books to survive. It only needed stone, light, and proportion to be passed down through generations. Think about the modern Masonic Lodge. Its rituals revolve around the compass and square. It honors a great architect of the universe, and every initiation ceremony involves a symbolic rebuilding of Solomon's temple. Official history often dismisses these as inventions of the Enlightenment. But are they? The similarities to Templar practices, the sacred oaths of secrecy, the reverence for the temple, and the use of symbols as memory keys are too striking to be coincidental. It strongly suggests that the Freemasons became the new guardians of the knowledge the Templars once carried. The connection to Solomon's temple was never accidental. Ancient descriptions of it focus not on its riches, but on its perfect measurements and alignments. To its followers, the temple isn't just a historical ruin, it's a blueprint, a cipher for how to reflect divine order here on earth. To preserve that blueprint is to claim an authority entirely outside of the Vatican's control, one based not on a lineage of men, but on cosmic truth. This is why the symbols were so dangerous, why they caused such fear, and why they survived every attempt to destroy them. The more you look, the more uncanny the connections become. Gothic cathedrals rise toward the heavens like scriptures written in stone, whispering with the same sacred geometry. Masonic temples host secret oaths that directly echo the charges given to Templar knights. Even the crests of royal families and the seals of entire nations contain emblems that trace their lineage back to the stone vaults of Solomon's temple. Was this all just a historical accident, or was it the result of the Solomonic Code being deliberately and carefully threaded through the fabric of Western civilization to ensure its survival? Symbols only truly die when they are forgotten. As long as they are remembered, they can outlast the greatest of empires. The Vatican understood this danger, but by the time it did, it was too late. To eradicate the symbols would have meant tearing down its own magnificent monuments. And so the symbols were allowed to remain, tolerated but deeply mistrusted, always visible but never explained. For the public, they were just decoration. For the initiated, they were a promise of a hidden covenant. This created a strange duality, a shadow church built of stone and symbol existing within the official one built of doctrine. When we see a compass on a building today, or twin pillars at an entrance, do we see mere ornament? Or do we see a language far older than any empire, a code passed in silence? The fact that these forms align so perfectly across time should not be possible. The fact that they all whisper the name of Solomon is even more incredible. The cross and the compass, the square and the pillars, they all point to the same unspoken truth. The Solomonic Pact was never destroyed. It was simply concealed, written into the very symbols that continue to shape our world. Legends persist about ancient writings once concealed deep within Jerusalem. These weren't just any documents. They were scrolls, carefully preserved in copper casings or cloth wrappings and secured in forgotten chambers far below the foundations of Solomon's temple, as if waiting for a future moment of rediscovery. The official historical narrative insists that conquest and fire wiped these texts from existence long ago. But whispers and pieces of unofficial testimony hint at a different story, one where something crucial managed to survive the devastation in secret. A persistent phantom in the corridors of history is the idea that the Knights Templar unearthed these lost scriptures during their time on the Temple Mount. If this theory holds any water, their incredible wealth and influence were founded not on gold, but on a set of words scrubbed from the official record, words that detailed a pact with the divine far older than the Roman Church, a Solomonic covenant kept alive through secrecy. Think about the intense control the Church maintained over its official biblical canon. A vast number of texts were dismissed as apocryphal, rejected, and condemned as heresy, all to protect a singular authorized version of history. However, ensuring something is silenced is not the same as making it vanish. Deep in the caves by the Dead Sea, scrolls hundreds of years old outlasted both invasion and attempts at erasure. The simple fact of their survival proves that written memory has ways of escaping the flames. If texts like these could endure in desert caves, could they not also survive beneath the bedrock of the temple itself? Imagine if the Templars, while stationed directly above those ancient ruins, discovered writings that had been intentionally hidden by priests who saw destruction on the horizon. These wouldn't be texts about doctrine, but about alignment and proportion, a blueprint connecting the earthly and celestial realms, a code with the power to build and unmake entire kingdoms. This kind of discovery would finally solve the paradox of their sudden ascent. How does a small, impoverished order of knights suddenly begin to wield unbelievable influence? Mere chance is an insufficient answer. But if they inherited a library of secret texts, a set of instructions written in a language of symbols, it would reframe their entire story. They would be transformed from simple soldiers into guardians, from warriors into custodians of a wisdom that no king or pope could claim. Such knowledge would be profoundly dangerous, because it moved the source of authority away from religious doctrine and toward geometry, shifting power from a papal decree to a direct alignment with a more ancient covenant. An institution like the Church cannot abide a competitor that claims a direct line to heaven without its blessing. For centuries, hushed tales of these vanished scrolls have endured. Some legends describe them as containing fragments of Enochian wisdom. Other stories claim they were instructional manuals for ancient temple rituals, while still others suggest they were cosmic charts that mapped the heavens onto the sanctuary's very architecture. Regardless of whether these tales are literal or symbolic, they all point to the same incredible possibility, that a body of knowledge, once sealed inside the temple, was brought to Europe by the Templars. This knowledge was then intricately woven into the rites of the Freemasons, who appear to recall a history that the world tried to forget. The very persistence of temple imagery within their ceremonies is strong evidence of this transfer. They aren't inventing these symbols, they are remembering them. With this in mind, the Vatican's violent reaction to the Templars starts to make perfect sense. If the Knights truly had texts that contradicted or went beyond official scripture, it posed a direct threat to papal authority. For hundreds of years, the Church had been the one and only interpreter of sacred history. A competing archive, especially one with a direct link to King Solomon, would shatter that monopoly on truth. It was far safer to label the order as heretics and bury them under accusations, than to allow the revelation of texts suggesting a divine order existed beyond Rome's jurisdiction. And so, the scrolls disappear from the official record, not because they were a myth, but because admitting they existed was far too risky. Their very absence becomes a form of testimony. Why else would both Templar and Freemason traditions be so fixated on the idea of hidden archives, of lost words, and of a master's secret that is never quite fully revealed? The rituals of initiation so often center on finding a hidden room, pulling back a veil, or rediscovering a lost name. These are not just metaphors, they are reenactments of a memory, a dramatic retelling of the Pact being passed down through generations. The lost scrolls of Jerusalem may be gone from sight, but their spirit energizes the oaths and symbols of societies that, on the surface, should have no link, yet clearly do. Their scripture, in a way, became architecture. The geometry encoded in great cathedrals mirrors the measurements of the ancient temple. Masonic lodges recreate the holy inner sanctum in miniature, as if they are rebuilding it from fragments of a text they once held. While the parchment may have disappeared, its core principles live on in stone, in ritual, and in symbols. To dismiss the existence of these scrolls is to willfully ignore the uncanny similarity between what was supposedly lost to history and what mysteriously reemerges centuries later. It is as if the covenant itself simply refuses to be erased. The Solomonic Code, therefore, is not just a rumor. It is a continuity of memory, passed along through any medium that could survive: stone, ritual, or a sworn oath. The unsettling question is whether these vanished writings might still exist today, tucked away in secret archives or hidden beneath heavily guarded chapels, protected by those who understand their true power. Some believe the Vatican itself holds them in its deepest vaults, confiscated during the Templar trials and locked away with other forbidden knowledge. Others propose the scrolls were carried westward and given to hidden communities, their contents resurfacing in pieces to ignite the Masonic imagination. The absolute truth remains hidden from view, but the simple fact that these rumors persist is its own form of evidence. A memory that refuses to die often holds a kernel of truth. Ultimately, the vanished scrolls of Jerusalem are more than just lost documents. They symbolize the deep-seated conflict over memory itself, the battle to control what humanity is allowed to remember and what it is forced to forget. If the Solomonic Pact was truly written down in those texts, then the history we've been taught is incomplete by design. The story on the surface is one of destruction, of erasure, and of ashes. But just beneath lies a very different narrative, one of survival, of secret transmission, and of a code carried forward in silence. Seeing this possibility is the key to understanding why the Templars rose so fast, why the Vatican was so afraid, and what the Freemasons inherited. The Pact endures not on parchment, but in the echoes that will not be silenced. At a glance, the rites of the Freemasons seem to belong to a world far removed from medieval knights, one shaped by Enlightenment philosophy and the spirit of fraternity. But a deeper look reveals unmistakable reflections of Templar traditions that are too precise to be a coincidence. Oaths taken in absolute secrecy, initiations designed as symbolic quests, and a profound reverence for the lost Temple of Solomon all point to a powerful conclusion: that the journey which began in the vaults beneath Jerusalem with the Knights Templar found a new way to continue. This new path seems to have emerged centuries later, finding a home within European lodges that operated under a new banner. The standard account tells us that Freemasonry simply grew out of old guild traditions, a society of builders who saw geometry as the heart of their craft. Yet, a more compelling theory whispers that the Masons weren't innovators at all, but inheritors. They were the new guardians of the very same Solomonic Pact, which had been kept alive in secret ever since the Templars were destroyed. We know from medieval records that the Templars conducted strange rituals at night, in chambers sealed off from the world. Even confessions forced from them during their trials, though brutal, tell a consistent story of secret initiations, solemn vows of silence, and ceremonies centered on hidden relics or powerful names. Flash forward several hundred years, and Masonic documents paint a strikingly similar picture. Candidates are blindfolded and guided through a series of symbolic trials. They pass between two great pillars, swear powerful oaths on sacred books, and are given sacred knowledge one small piece at a time. This level of similarity is far too specific to be chalked up to mere chance. It feels as if the Templar traditions, though shattered by flames, were reborn within these lodges. They may have adopted the humble language of builders, but they held onto the same profound reverence for Solomon's ancient sanctuary. But what is it about Solomon? Why would both a powerful order of medieval knights and a later fraternity of craftsmen fixate on this one temple? The established church, after all, directs its worship toward Calvary and the Holy Sepulchre. Yet these secret societies repeatedly turn their focus to a structure that was demolished centuries before the time of Christ. For them, the temple is far more than just a historical monument. It is the physical embodiment of geometry, a living blueprint of divine and cosmic order. To ritually reconstruct it is to actively take part in its ancient covenant. It is a way to realign oneself with the fundamental proportions that connect the heavens to the earth. This is the very heart of the Solomonic Code. It isn't a doctrine you read from a book, but a powerful pattern you live out through action. The oaths sworn in Freemasonry, just like those once whispered by the Templars, are designed to bind an initiate not just to fraternal loyalty, but to absolute secrecy and the protection of a sacred, hidden inheritance. The gravity of this duty is underscored by the penalties described for breaking these oaths, which, while often symbolic, are genuinely chilling. Fraternities don't threaten such consequences for simple camaraderie. You invoke that level of severity only when you are protecting something utterly irreplaceable. So, if the Knights Templar were guarding actual physical scrolls or relics, perhaps the Freemasons took on the task of guarding the memory of that duty. They encoded that memory into dramatic rituals, ensuring it could never be lost, even if the original artifacts were gone forever. In this way, every single initiation serves as both an act of remembrance and an act of transmission, a living, breathing archive of the ancient Pact. What makes this theory so compelling is the stunning consistency in the symbolism. The twin pillars, known as Jachin and Bows, are a central feature in every Masonic lodge, just as they were reportedly central to the layout of Templar chambers. The core Masonic theme of receiving light after a period of darkness, and of secret words being revealed only to the worthy, perfectly mirrors the descriptions of Templar rites that so horrified their inquisitors. Even the central Masonic legend of a lost word seems to be a direct echo of the rumors about vanished scrolls the Templars supposedly found beneath the Temple Mount. Any one of these elements could be dismissed as a creative invention, but when you see them all together, they strongly suggest a direct inheritance. They point to an unbroken chain of knowledge stretching all the way from the vaults of Jerusalem to the lodges of Europe. This continuity was certainly not missed by the Vatican. In fact, the Church's official condemnations of Freemasonry sound eerily familiar, almost perfectly repeating the language once used to bring down the Templars. The charges were practically identical: secret oaths that create a rival allegiance and heretical beliefs hidden behind a wall of symbols. In reality, the thing being condemned wasn't secrecy itself. It was the suspicion of a much older loyalty, a pact tied not to Rome and the Pope, but to the sacred sanctuary of Solomon. To acknowledge that this lineage is real is to admit a devastating truth, that papal decrees and brute force never truly ended the pact. They just drove it underground, forcing it to evolve into new forms that could not be so easily destroyed. Here we see the ultimate paradox of its survival. The Knights Templar were shattered by their trials and burned at the stake, but they lived on as a powerful memory. That memory then put on new clothes, re-emerging as the fraternity of Freemasons, a group that claims no official descent, yet carries the unmistakable echoes of its predecessor. The inheritance wasn't a name, a title, or a rigid hierarchy. It was the very essence of the Solomonic Code, a deep reverence for sacred geometry, a devotion to hidden wisdom, and an unbreakable loyalty to a covenant that transcends time. This is precisely why their ceremonies, even when performed in modern buildings, feel so profoundly ancient. They aren't new creations of their time. They are vessels carrying a powerful continuity, quietly preserving the knowledge that history tried so hard to erase. Perhaps this is the true genius of the Pact. You can burn scrolls, you can seize relics, and you can lock away entire archives, but you cannot destroy rituals that have been woven into the collective memory of generations. They continue to live in the gestures, in the words, and in the very architecture of the lodge. To swear one of their oaths is to personally renew the pact. To pass between the pillars is to walk again in the temple. To receive light from the darkness is to reenact the original discovery. Through these actions, the Freemasons became more than just heirs to a tradition. They transformed into the living embodiment of the code itself. They became guardians of a covenant passed down not on fragile parchment, but through powerful, repeated performance. If this is true, then the Solomonic Pact never fell silent. It never stopped moving through history. Even when condemned by official decree, it continued to flow through the hidden chambers of lodges, through the geometry of great cathedrals, and through the symbols carved into stone. And with every new initiation, it ensures its survival for another generation, another century, another empire. The Knights Templar may have been erased from history, but their inheritance was not. It carries on, hidden within the rites of the Freemasons who, whether they know it or not, are preserving a covenant that the Vatican could never fully extinguish. And this hidden covenant reveals itself not just in rituals, but in the very ground beneath our feet, especially when we look at the principles of sacred geometry. Knowledge grows when it is shared. If you know a fellow seeker, or just someone who needs a peaceful escape into the past, feel free to share this video with them. The design of Washington, D.C., with its grand obelisks, domes, and carefully planned alignments, directly reflects proportions found in both ancient sanctuaries and the private halls of Masonic lodges. The Capitol Dome, for instance, evokes the Great Vault of the heavens, while the Washington Monument rises as a solitary pillar, a conceptual twin to the great columns that once stood at a temple's entrance. You could dismiss this as coincidence, but when you trace the symbols of the compass and square across city maps, alignments begin to emerge that are far too precise to be accidental. So, was this just groundbreaking architecture, or was it the quiet continuation of a code much older than any nation, perhaps older even than the faith proclaimed at its founding? This brings us to sacred geometry, which is so much more than mathematics. It is memory encoded in proportion, a philosophy for seeing the world as an ordered reflection of a grand cosmic design. The Solomonic Pact, if it survived, was always centered on this divine alignment. To rebuild the temple, whether in physical stone or through symbolic ritual, was to reaffirm a connection with that ancient covenant. Cathedrals, lodges, and even entire cities therefore become pages in a hidden manuscript. It's a book that survives not by being read, but by being inhabited. Every stone placed in perfect alignment, every arch drawn in harmonious proportion, is a silent act of remembrance, a quiet renewal of loyalty to a code that was never fully erased. And in a twist of historical irony, the Vatican, perhaps unknowingly, became a key participant in this transmission. Many of its most magnificent basilicas were built using the exact same geometrical proportions, for a simple reason: the builders themselves were master masons, deeply versed in the craft and its symbolic language. In this way, the very church that sought to condemn the code ended up enshrining it in stone for all eternity. This paradox haunts the pages of history. The institution that feared the Solomonic Pact the most unwittingly became its greatest monument, filling Europe with majestic structures that whisper of the covenant in total silence. Perhaps this is the ultimate irony of power. What is most feared often becomes absorbed, ensuring its survival through the very act of suppression. Consider the map of Europe itself, which is dotted with churches aligned to the solstices, sanctuaries built upon ancient pagan sites, and lodges constructed with twin pillars recalling Jachin and bows. Viewed together, these are not just scattered monuments. They form a vast, interconnected web, a design stretching across the continent like a hidden constellation. To walk through these cities is to walk through a living diagram of the Solomonic Code, one that communicates not with words, but with the language of space itself. How many people pass through these places daily, completely unaware that they are treading upon a geometry designed to preserve a covenant concealed from history's surface? Symbols can be erased from books. Geometry, however, resists the eraser. A building cannot be easily destroyed without taking a piece of the city with it. Thus, the Pact hides in plain sight, embedded in the very structures meant to endure for centuries. Every arch, every spire, every alignment serves as a reminder. Even when the names are forgotten, the geometry endures, quietly proclaiming what lips no longer dare to utter. The Solomonic Code survives not as myth, but as stone, as city, as proportion itself. And so, the geometry continues to speak long after kings have fallen and empires have collapsed. It whispers through the stones of cathedrals, through the chambers of lodges, and through the alignments of monuments. It tells those who can see that the covenant was never broken, that the pact still flows like a hidden current just beneath history's surface. Whether in Europe's oldest sanctuaries or America's youngest capitals, the message remains the same. The Solomonic Code endures, alive in geometry, waiting to be read by those awake enough to see the lines. But what if the code wasn't just preserved in stone? Dynasties rise and fall, but behind their marriages and alliances, there often lies a hidden pattern, one that seems less political and more symbolic. From the Plantagenets of England to the Habsburgs of Austria, royal families forged unions that on the surface appeared purely strategic. Yet beneath them, whispers have always persisted of a deeper purpose: the preservation of a bloodline connected directly to the Solomonic inheritance. The very idea that the temple's wisdom could be carried not only in scrolls or geometry, but in flesh and blood unsettles the official narrative, for it suggests a continuity that exists beyond the reach of any conquest or decree. If bloodlines carried fragments of the Pact, then every coronation, every royal marriage, became not merely a political act, but a covenantal one. Medieval chronicles often celebrate unions between noble houses as great victories of diplomacy. Yet certain specific alliances carry a strange and persistent echo of temple symbolism. Families entwined with Templar patrons, who later became intertwined with Masonic networks, appear all across Europe like threads of an invisible tapestry. Were these unions just accidents of history? Or were they deliberate attempts to preserve something much older, a legacy woven through veins rather than written on parchments? Some legends even speak of Solomon himself, fathering heirs whose line would stretch into distant lands, carrying fragments of wisdom encoded in their very ancestry. These tales may be dismissed as myth, yet myths endure when they serve to protect a memory too dangerous for history to keep openly. Consider the curious prominence of the House of Stuart, which claimed descent not only from royal forebears, but from a lineage said to connect with the temple itself. Or think of the legends surrounding the Ethiopian Solomonic dynasty, which asserts direct descent from Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, and claims to be the guardian of the Ark of the Covenant in Axum. Though separated by continents, these stories all circle the same incredible claim: that blood itself may serve as a vessel for a covenant, and that dynasties hold much more than just crowns. They hold the continuity of a pact. To see this possibility is to glimpse why certain families guarded their secrets with such ferocity, and why alliances were forged even at the cost of war. Centuries later, the Freemasons often exalted kings and nobles within their lodges, granting them high positions despite their limited knowledge of the craft. Was this merely flattery, or was it a form of recognition for an inherited thread? If the Solomonic Pact flowed not only through architecture, but also through blood, then these rulers carried a responsibility invisible to their subjects. Their reigns were less about governance than about guarding a sacred memory, keeping alive a lineage that bore silent witness to the code. In this light, the revolutions that toppled so many dynasties take on a new resonance. They were not only political upheavals, but perhaps attempts to sever the hidden continuity of these bloodlines tied to Solomon. The Vatican, ever wary of rival claims to authority, could not easily tolerate such legends. Its own power was built on apostolic succession, and the idea of Solomonic descent threatened to outshine it by tracing a line directly to Israel's most celebrated king. This tension surfaces in subtle condemnations from the period, in silences where records should exist, and in archives sealed against inquiry. The Church feared not only documents but entire dynasties, not only scrolls but marriages, for each might embody the continuity of a covenant far older than Rome. The suppression of the Templars was one measure. The quiet undermining of royal houses suspected of hidden loyalties was another. Yet bloodlines resist erasure as stubbornly as geometry. Families may be dethroned, exiled, and scattered, but marriage weaves continuity back together, even in exile. The famous Habsburg jaw, the persistent claims of the Stuarts, the mysteries of the Bourbons, all of these might mask deeper whispers that hidden within these great houses is not only royal ambition, but a covenantal inheritance. A pact passed down in blood is harder to seize, for it cannot be burned or locked in a vault. It flows silently, invisibly, a reminder that some legacies endure even when forgotten by the world around them. To walk through European history with this suspicion is to see patterns others simply ignore. Why do certain families repeatedly intersect with orders condemned by the Vatican? Why do their crests bear symbols that echo temple imagery? Why do their marriages seem to renew ancient alliances far more than serve simple political convenience? Each question opens another door, and behind each door waits the same startling possibility, and that possibility is staggering. Because what if it's carried not just in stone, but in blood? It's an idea that could finally explain why certain dynasties have always functioned as living containers for a secret agreement, a pact hidden just below the surface of our official histories. Such a continuous legacy would also clarify why so many nobles and royals were intensely drawn to Freemasonry, actively seeking initiation into its ranks. For them, joining was not about discovering something new, it was an act of remembrance, a recognition of an ancestral truth they already carried within them. In this sense, the lodge and the palace were inextricably bound. One institution preserved the code through oaths and architecture, while the other safeguarded it through inheritance and bloodline. This dual system of preservation could have guaranteed that the Solomonic Pact would endure, weathering both violent revolutions and targeted persecutions. It is perhaps this very idea that fuels our unending fascination with dynastic secrets, the persistent tales of hidden heirs and secret royal marriages that long outlive the empires they belong to. Our curiosity isn't rooted in romantic fantasy, but in the compelling notion of continuity. It's the suspicion that the secrets once guarded in Solomon's vaults are now flowing through the veins of specific families. To dismiss this as mere legend is to willfully ignore a recurring pattern, a design that continually resurfaces just when we think it has vanished for good. The Solomonic Pact, it seems, wasn't just etched in geometry and honored in ritual. It may have also been written in blood, linking not just lodges and temples, but entire dynasties. As the 14th century dawned and the Knights Templar faced their catastrophic downfall, rumors began to circulate about documents drafted in Paris, papers never intended for public consumption. While official accounts speak of trials, charges, and forced confessions, a different story hides in the margins of history. This alternate narrative hints at another agreement, one that was meticulously scrubbed from the record. This wasn't a pact between the knights and the Pope. Instead, it was an understanding between the surviving remnants of the order and other powerful forces, who were determined to protect the knowledge unearthed from beneath Solomon's temple. The very concept is unsettling, because it implies the Solomonic covenant survived not by chance, but by a deliberate and brilliant design, secretly sealed even as its guardians were publicly burned at the stake. This theory gained incredible weight centuries later with the discovery of the Chinon parchment, found tucked away within the Vatican's own archives. This document stunningly reveals that Pope Clement V had secretly absolved key Templar leaders of heresy, a fact that completely undermines the official justification used for their brutal extermination. It forces us to ask, if absolution was granted, why was it kept so quiet? The answer may lie in negotiation, a quiet acknowledgement that the order possessed something far too valuable to be utterly destroyed. This erased Pact of Paris, whether a physical document or a whispered understanding, points to a massive compromise. For public eyes, total annihilation. For the initiated, carefully planned continuity. This fits perfectly within the paradoxes of power. The Vatican needed to project absolute dominance, but it couldn't afford to risk unleashing whatever the Templars had found. Kings, for their part, demanded the Templars' riches, but what they confiscated was just land and treasure, not the far more profound inheritance of knowledge. A different transaction was happening beneath the surface, an unrecorded but enduring agreement ensuring that fragments of the Solomonic Code would be safely transferred into new hands. History tells us all about the executions, but it is completely silent about where the code itself went. That silence is perhaps the most compelling evidence that such a pact existed. We have legends of Templar fleets sailing from French ports in the dead of night, laden with treasures too precious to be lost. Historians assume they carried gold, but what if the cargo was something else entirely? What if those ships were filled with manuscripts, ancient relics, and sacred instructions, objects of memory infinitely more valuable than coin. Then, centuries later, the Freemasons appear, their rituals uncannily echoing Templar vows. Could this continuity be the direct result of that erased pact, the very agreement designed to ensure knowledge would survive even as its guardians were condemned? The possibility lingers, a shadow that no official chronicle has ever dared to illuminate. The Vatican's own archives are a testament to this selective silence. Thousands of documents related to the Templars remain under lock and key, their secrets known only to a select few. While scholars are occasionally granted fragmented access, the complete records of the Templar trials, particularly those detailing their possessions, remain obscured. Why would you carefully preserve something you want the world to forget? Why hold on to documents supposedly filled with heresy? Unless, of course, those papers contain traces of that negotiation, offering glimpses of a covenant that survived the flames, proof that the Church itself was forced to acknowledge a rival authority, one originating not in Rome, but in the Temple of Solomon. What makes this possibility more chilling is how this pattern of suppression repeats itself over the centuries. Freemasonry, condemned repeatedly by papal bulls, faced accusations almost identical to those once thrown at the Templars: secret oaths, a rival allegiance, and a claim to hidden knowledge. The cycle plays out again and again, as if the Vatican keeps recognizing the ghost of that erased pact moving through time, always reappearing in a new disguise it cannot eliminate. Each condemnation becomes an echo of that original fear, the fear that the Covenant of Solomon, carried through Templar hands, remains alive and unbroken. If so, then Paris was not just the stage for the Templars' destruction, it was also the site of their preservation. Beneath the public spectacle of trials and executions, a completely different event was unfolding: a quiet handover, a secret negotiation, a pact sealed by erasure. The Templars as an organization vanished, but their symbols endured. The order was condemned, yet its rituals resurfaced. The Vatican triumphed publicly, yet its own archives hide their absolution. Such stark contradictions don't point to closure, they scream of concealment. History records an ending, but reality hints at a continuation. The erased Pact of Paris thus stands as a powerful reminder that history is written not only in chronicles but in its silences, in what is omitted, hidden, or denied. We will likely never see the documents. Yet the persistent continuity of the Solomonic Code strongly suggests that some accord ensured its survival. The pact itself remains invisible, but its effects continue to ripple through the centuries, shaping lodges, cathedrals, revolutions, and empires. And so we are left with a final paradox, one more unsettling than any open conspiracy. The guardians were executed and their order was annihilated, yet their covenant endures. This suggests that what is erased from parchment survives in ritual, what is hidden from archives survives in symbols, and what is condemned in public survives in silence. And nowhere is this silent survival more evident than inside a Masonic lodge, where symbols are a language of instruction, not just decoration. The compass and square teach of balance and measure, but their geometry points to a much older wisdom whispered in King Solomon's court. This is why Masons invoke a great architect of the universe. For them, divinity is found in the very design and proportion of the cosmos itself. Consequently, their halls are deliberately aligned with the stars, echoing ancient practices at Jerusalem's temple. Just think what it means for a modern fraternity to use the sky as its blueprint, mirroring alignments held sacred for millennia. The original temple was a cosmic diagram, a house reflecting the heavens in its very measurements. To rebuild it symbolically is to consciously join that covenant between earth and sky. The Freemasons, inheriting echoes of Templar devotion, transformed this powerful principle into ritual. Every initiation becomes a reconstruction of the temple, each symbol a reminder that proportion governs the universe. The Solomonic Code is therefore not just remembered, but is actively performed, lived through gesture, architecture, and orientation. You can find traces of this cosmic orientation across Europe, in cathedrals whose foundations align with solstices, equinoxes, and star risings. The Gothic builders, many being precursors to Masons, raised what were essentially stone calendars and sanctuaries that mirrored the heavens. While the Vatican may have blessed their construction, the alignment itself was far older, part of a covenant traced all the way back to Solomon. When light enters these sanctuaries on precise days to illuminate an altar, you are witnessing a ritual of cosmic remembrance written in architecture. Freemasonry continued this inheritance, though in its more measured halls rather than grand cathedrals. Lodges may seem modest compared to soaring spires, but their symbolism is no less profound. Each chamber is a miniature temple. Its orientation is deliberate, its pillars recall the legendary Jachin and bows, and its ceiling is painted as a starry firmament. The initiate walking this space participates in a cosmic drama, enacting the same alignment that once defined Solomon's sanctuary. This constant repetition over centuries suggests more than mere tradition. It points to a continuous pact preserved not in words, but in the language of stars and stone. The practice extends right into modernity with the Washington Monument, rising like a solitary obelisk. Its alignment to the cardinal points, paired with domes and chambers across the Capitol that echo ancient sanctuaries, transforms the entire city into a temple. The builders may have claimed Enlightenment ideals, but the geometry tells an older story. It's as if the Solomonic Code, passed from Templars to Masons, found new expression in the very design of a nation. The heavens are mirrored in street grids and the placement of monuments. The Vatican's response to these orientations was predictable: condemnation of Freemasonry, fueled by suspicion of hidden allegiances and fear of a rival devotion. Yet, the paradox is inescapable. How could Rome condemn the very geometry used to build its most celebrated churches? These same cosmic alignments appear in both papal-sanctioned basilicas and the lodges they condemned. The covenant survives in both rebellion and obedience, weaving through history like a thread that cannot be cut. This reveals the Solomonic Pact's true nature. It transcends any single institution, enduring wherever builders remember to honor the sky. For the initiate, the lesson is clear. The stars above and the stones below are not separate, but are reflections of one another. To align a hall with the heavens is to acknowledge a truth older than any doctrine, that the universe itself is a temple, and the temple is a microcosm of the universe. This recognition was always Solomon's code, preserved through symbols and alignments, carried by Templars and reborn in Masonic rites. Though condemned by Rome, it remains immortal in stone. The question that lingers is not if the code survives, but how deeply it shapes our world without our awareness. Every aligned cathedral and oriented lodge testifies to a covenant hidden in plain sight. The surface story tells of architecture, the hidden story tells of remembrance. For Templars and later the Freemasons, initiation was this very act of remembrance, a dramatization of truths that could not be spoken aloud. A candidate didn't just join a group, he entered a covenant, stepping into a stream of memory flowing back to Solomon's temple. Every vow and gesture acted as a key, binding the initiate to a code older than kingdoms. To pass through initiation was to recover what the world had declared lost. Accounts from the Templar trials speak of whispered oaths and misunderstood rites, a structure that echoes centuries later in Masonic ritual. The blindfolded candidate led through darkness, the unveiling of light, the passage between pillars, and the receiving of a lost word. Historians dismiss these parallels as simple invention, yet the resonance feels far too deep. This profound resonance suggests the covenant's survival depended on something far more dynamic than dusty documents. For the Solomonic Pact to be truly preserved, it needed to be performed, brought to life through a living ritual that ensured its memory could never fade. The entire purpose of initiation is to guide a person from a state of ignorance to one of profound recognition. An initiate, once blind to the hidden code, is led through a series of steps until they can see intentional alignment in what once appeared to be mere chance. In this process, stone pillars become more than just supports, a compass becomes more than a simple tool, and an oath transforms into something far deeper than loyalty. Every element serves as a revelation, yet it's a revelation wrapped in symbols and guarded by a vow of silence. A ceremony that looks meaningless to an outsider is, for the insider, the reawakening of a powerful memory. Initiation thus serves as the ultimate engine of continuity, guaranteeing the Solomonic Code is passed down not on fragile parchment, but through the indelible medium of human experience. This was precisely what the Vatican feared most. One can seize scrolls and confiscate holy relics, but rituals performed within silent, hidden chambers are impossible to destroy. Each new member was effectively transformed into a living archive, carrying the fragments of the covenant inside their own mind. To burn these men at the stake was a desperate attempt to burn memory itself, but memory simply passed to the next initiate, outlasting both fire and official condemnation. This explains the incredible endurance of secret societies. They survive because their greatest treasures are not stored in physical vaults, but are instead safeguarded within the hearts of those who swear to remember. The ritual drama of initiation frequently involves a symbolic death and subsequent rebirth, a metaphorical journey through the grave into a new existence. The Templars, when accused by inquisitors of renouncing Christ or kissing idols, were likely having their symbolic acts of death mistaken for genuine blasphemy. For the Masons, the very same mystery is reenacted through the ritual of a slain master and the quest to find a lost word. In this tradition, death is not an ending but a doorway, and concealment is not loss but a necessary prelude to revelation. To walk this initiatory path is to become a mirror of the temple itself, destroyed but never gone, hidden but never erased. The initiate literally becomes the temple, with their own body serving as a vault where the sacred code is inscribed. What does this tell us about the Solomonic Pact? It suggests the pact is not merely architectural or textual, but intensely personal. Every initiate is made into a vessel, and every oath taken is a seal placed upon memory. The code doesn't just live in old documents, it lives in flesh and blood, in a consciousness reshaped by ritual. This is the reason suppression has always failed. It's why centuries of condemnation were ultimately in vain, and why the code continues to resurface with each new generation. To this day, initiation remains the absolute heart of Masonic practice. The ritual might appear purely symbolic, but its incredible power is found precisely within that symbolism. To take part in the drama is to connect with a memory far older than oneself and join an unbroken chain of the covenant. Every candidate, whether they consciously realize it or not, is stepping directly into the Solomonic Pact. They renew it with their vows, becoming the newest link in a chain that stretches back through the lodges, through the Knights Templar, all the way to the original temple itself. This continuity isn't just a theory, it is actively lived in every oath, every ceremony, and every moment of guarded silence. The lingering question this raises is deeply unsettling. If every initiate becomes a living part of the covenant, then the Solomonic Pact isn't a dusty artifact of the past, but a vibrant, active current that is shaping our present. How many among us are walking vessels of this ancient memory, bound by their vows to protect what can never be spoken openly? How many carry pieces of a code that the rest of the world is certain has been erased? The rituals guarantee its survival, the oaths guarantee the silence, and the drama guarantees its continuity. The covenant endures not because it is written down, but because it is remembered. Initiation, therefore, reveals itself as the true, beating heart of the pact. It goes beyond scrolls, beyond architecture, and beyond bloodlines. It is the moment of awakening, the recovery of something thought lost, and the renewal of a loyalty to a promise older than any empire. The initiate leaves the ceremony a changed person, not because they learned new facts, but because they have merged with a stream of memory that has never stopped flowing. Through this process, the Solomonic Code continues to breathe, concealed within the silence of ceremonies, preserved in the very bodies of its guardians, and kept alive in the simple, powerful act of remembering. Throughout history, there have been moments when the Vatican and the lodges, despite their public opposition, seemed to operate in a strange, unspoken harmony, as if their rivalry was a cover for deeper collaborations. The Church issued countless papal bulls condemning Freemasonry, using accusations that echoed those once thrown at the Templars. And yet, whispers persisted that certain popes and cardinals held Masonic sympathies, or, at the very least, tolerated the existence of lodges within their domains. This contradiction points not just to a simple conflict, but to a hidden dialogue, a tacit admission that total suppression was impossible, and that some form of uneasy coexistence was required. Look at the Renaissance, a period when knowledge long dismissed as pagan, geometry, astronomy, and sacred proportion, staged a spectacular return right inside the Church's own halls. These principles, once viewed with deep suspicion, were given new life in magnificent basilicas financed by the papacy itself. Masters like Michelangelo, Bernini, and Bramante built stone temples whose designs reflected the rules of sacred geometry far more than they did theological doctrine. While these incredible monuments were meant to glorify Rome, their physical alignments whispered the same core principles held dear by the Masonic tradition. Was this convergence a mere coincidence, or was it a form of collaboration hidden beneath layers of official doctrine? The Church publicly condemned the symbols, even as its greatest monuments gave them an eternal home, a silent union disguised as rivalry, playing out in stone. Stories persist, difficult to prove but impossible to ignore, of secret negotiations between Vatican emissaries and the leaders of Masonic lodges, especially during times of political instability. Freemasons were known to be a driving force behind revolutions, yet they often left room for the continuity of Catholic influence. The Church, in turn, would publicly denounce the lodges while privately, on occasion, hiring their most skilled architects. This very contradiction opens the door to a far more intricate relationship than simple animosity. It's possible that both institutions understood a fundamental truth. The Solomonic Code was woven so deeply into the cultural landscape of Europe that it could never be truly uprooted. The only choice, then, was to manage it, conceal it, or perhaps even share it in the quietest of ways. Whispers from the past even tell of papal envoys, cloaked in disguise, slipping into Masonic lodges. They weren't just spies. They were observers, their careful watch a mixture of both apprehension and deep-seated fascination. If these stories hold any water, they point to a stunning realization. Behind the official condemnation was a tacit acknowledgement that the geometry protected by the lodges was the very same sacred mathematics that gave rise to Rome's own magnificent monuments. To admit this publicly was unthinkable, as it would directly challenge papal supremacy. But to ignore it completely was simply not an option. And so a silent compromise was struck. Loud, public denunciations on one hand and private, strategic absorption on the other. A rivalry played out for all to see, while a partnership flourished in the shadows. This delicate dance of opposition and alliance dramatically reemerges during the Enlightenment, a period when Freemasons were central figures in the revolutions that would redefine entire nations. Many of these revolutionaries proudly displayed Masonic symbols. At the same time, their calls to action often mirrored the Christian virtues of liberty, equality, and brotherhood, principles the Church itself could hardly condemn. Faced with these movements, the Vatican was forced to confront the disquieting reality that the very ideals being discussed in Masonic halls were also becoming the foundational pillars of modern society. To get rid of the lodges would have been to try and stop the tide of history itself. Once more, we see a surface-level conflict hiding a reluctant, unspoken alignment. This connection may have run even deeper, with persistent rumors of a hidden Masonic presence inside the Vatican's own sacred walls. Stories abound of cardinals secretly belonging to the fraternities and of papal advisors sympathetic to the ideals of the lodge, controversies that were swiftly buried rather than brought to light. These tantalizing fragments suggest the Solomonic current was so powerful it even trickled through the corridors of Rome. The condemnations were shouted from the rooftops, but the silence was deafening. This enduring pact wasn't just surviving outside the Church, it was thriving within it, as if the very institution dedicated to its destruction couldn't help but absorb its essence. The irony is almost poetic. The Vatican, the designated keeper of apostolic tradition, and the Freemasons, the self-proclaimed protectors of the Solomonic Code, presented themselves as mortal enemies. In reality, they were like two sides of the same coin. Each asserted its own ultimate authority, one based on divine revelation, the other on sacred geometry, yet both erected breathtaking structures that followed the same universal proportions. Each denounced the other's beliefs, yet each quietly borrowed from the other's rich well of symbols. The animosity between them was genuine, but within that conflict lay a shared purpose too profound to ever be spoken aloud. This paradox leads us to a truly compelling question. Did the Vatican secretly view the Solomonic Code as legitimate, but simply too radical to ever publicly endorse? Was all the condemnation just a performance, a strategic mask to maintain authority while discreetly integrating a truth it could not afford to deny? If so, then a rivalry that defined centuries of history was, in fact, a carefully choreographed collaboration. One enforced silence through official decrees, while the other swore silence through sacred oaths. And through their combined efforts, they ensured the code would survive, perfectly hidden in plain sight. The Vatican and the Lodge might be opponents by name, but in the language of stone, ritual, and symbol, they share the exact same inheritance. The Solomonic Code endures, not because one side claimed victory, but because both, through their intricate dance of rivalry and silence, became its unintentional guardians. But this code wasn't just an idea, it had to be made real. Stone, after all, remembers in a way that parchment never can, locking proportions and ciphers into walls that can outlive entire libraries. Look closely at the great cathedrals, remote chapels, and secretive Masonic lodges, and you'll find the same numbers appearing with an almost supernatural consistency. 3s, 7s, and 12s are everywhere, figures that not only echo the rhythms of the Bible but also resonate with a pure mathematical harmony. For an outsider, these are just decorative choices. But for those with the knowledge to see, they are pieces of the Solomonic Code, a grand cipher camouflaged as stone and more profoundly as flesh. True secrecy demands more than just staying quiet, it requires embodiment. A covenant couldn't last if it were only written down, because texts can be burned. To truly survive, it had to be physically inscribed into the very buildings we live in and the bodies we occupy. Take Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, a place many call a library of Masonic symbolism built centuries before the order officially existed. Its magnificent arches seem to trace patterns of musical notation, while its ornate pillars are carved with designs that call back to Solomon's legendary temple. Here, the Solomonic Pact stops being a myth and becomes a manuscript made of architecture. The human body, too, was transformed into a living cipher. Within Masonic rituals, a silent language is spoken through specific gestures, hand grips, and stances, a language that is invisible to the uninitiated but perfectly clear to a brother. Every subtle movement acts as a key, and every posture holds symbolic weight. To take an oath using a precise placement of the hand is to write the covenant directly onto the flesh, turning the initiate's own body into the sacred parchment on which the pact is recorded. This brings to mind the accusations once leveled against the Knights Templar for performing obscene gestures. But what if those condemned acts were actually fragments of this very same physical cipher, a language their accusers were simply unable to read? Just as in flesh, memory was preserved in stone. The numbers carved into architecture reappear with deliberate purpose. Cathedrals with 7 windows, 12 pillars, or dimensions divisible by 3 are common. While easily explained as a nod to the Bible, the patterns also align perfectly with harmonic ratios celebrated in Pythagorean and Solomonic traditions, forging a link between scripture and geometry. The cube, the circle, and the triangle are repeated in sacred buildings across millennia, creating a silent code that has outlasted fallen empires. If these were all just matters of aesthetic taste, their incredible consistency across time and geography would be an unbelievable coincidence. It seems far more plausible that they are, in fact, deliberate signatures. As the timeline stretches back thousands of years, it is easy to feel small against the vastness of history. If you are enjoying this journey through time so far, comment the word ancient so I know you're still with me. And these signatures are everywhere once you know what to look for. Think about the enduring motif of the twin pillars, often called Jachin and bows. Their image is a constant, found in Masonic lodges, referenced in Templar histories, and built into chapels all across Europe. They are consistently presented as a pair, a duo standing as a gateway to something profound and hidden. To ritually pass between these pillars is to symbolically repeat the entrance into Solomon's great temple, a physical step into the covenant itself. When this single act is repeated over centuries, it magically transforms buildings into codes, simple movements into a readable story, and the human body into a walking library. This is far more than just ceremony. It is memory being actively encoded and constantly renewed. Even our own hands become part of this testimony. The secret grips shared between Masons create a cipher that can be felt but not seen. They are a form of silent communication, an inscription made of flesh that ties one member to all the others. Through this method, the code survives not just in stone monuments or fragile symbols, but within the body itself. This guarantees its continuation, even if every building were to turn to dust and every manuscript were to burn. Each new initiate is transformed into a temple, a cipher, and a living archive, carrying the unbroken lineage of the Pact in the very way they move their hands. An ever-suspicious Vatican, of course, denounced these bodily codes as dangerous, heretical, and even the work of the devil. But the fact that they've survived for so long points to a power that is simply too strong to be stamped out. It's pointless to outlaw a gesture that can be passed on in complete silence, from one hand to another, across countless generations. It's just as pointless to outlaw specific architectural ratios when they are carved into the very cathedrals the Church calls home. And here, the paradox gets even deeper. Rome was trapped. It couldn't get rid of the cipher without tearing down its own greatest monuments, undermining its own faith, and attacking its own body of followers. The code was able to last because it had been skillfully integrated into the core of the human experience. To this very day, architecture on every continent provides a silent testament to its presence. You can see it in the obelisks that rise in major world capitals and in the grand domes that mimic the vaults of heaven. The same ancient ratios are embedded in the design of our modern skyscrapers. This language, a vocabulary of numbers, pillars, geometry, and gestures, has not changed. The builders themselves may have forgotten the original meaning, but the forms live on, almost as if the code itself is fighting against being erased. Our minds might forget, but our instincts seem to remember. Stone will eventually crumble, but a perfect proportion is eternal. This is precisely how the Solomonic Pact continues on, not just in secret archives guarded by a select few, but in the very shapes and motions that give structure to our lives. This leaves us with a rather startling realization. It's possible that every cathedral, every lodge, and every ritual gesture conceals something far greater than just faith or tradition. They might be individual pieces of a grand cipher, one engineered to survive fire, persecution, and the relentless march of time. This is a code written in two mediums at once, stone and flesh. It was preserved not for the general population, but for the small number of people perceptive enough to notice it. The Solomonic Pact didn't survive because it was hidden so well. It survived because it was hidden everywhere, right out in the open, cleverly disguised as architecture, ritual, and simple human gestures. The cipher is still here, just waiting for those with trained eyes to come along and read its silent language. When an empire's symbols lose their authority, that empire is destined to collapse. Yet, revolutions have a remarkable way of revealing which emblems possess true, lasting power. During the great upheavals that shaped our modern world, from the American and French revolutions to smaller uprisings across Europe, a peculiar set of images kept surfacing. These images bore a strange resemblance not to the crests of the Pope or the banners of royalty, but to the geometric symbols carefully preserved within Masonic lodges. We see liberty caps, all-seeing eyes, twin pillars, and brilliant suns appear over and over again, woven directly into the fabric of radical change. On the surface, These symbols were said to represent freedom, reason, and progress. But just beneath that veneer, they echo with the memory of Solomon's Pact, as if the ancient covenant once protected by the Templars had switched its loyalty from the crown and the cross to a powerful new revolutionary movement. In France, for example, the revolutionaries tore down the monarchy but raised emblems that would be strikingly familiar to anyone who has studied Masonic rituals. The Declaration of the Rights of Man is famously framed by symbolic tablets and radiant eyes, an arrangement that perfectly mirrors the imagery found in lodges. The guillotine, for all its horror, was often draped with banners displaying geometric suns and triangles, shapes that feel less political and more covenantal. To the rest of the world, these were simply signs of newfound liberty. But to those in the know, they were fragments of the ancient pact, re-emerging in a new age to completely reshape society. It was almost as if the Solomonic Code had decided to survive not by aligning with kings, but by embracing chaos, embedding itself into the very vocabulary of revolution. A similar pattern of imagery appeared across the Atlantic in the newly formed United States. The Great Seal, with its iconic unfinished pyramid and all-seeing eye, has very little connection to Christian tradition, yet it carries undeniable echoes of Masonic geometry. The dollar bill that passes through millions of hands every day is covered in symbols that would be more at home in a lodge than in a church. Figures we revere as founding fathers, Washington, Franklin, Jefferson, were not just politicians, they were also initiates, men who built a nation not only with political ideals but with the memory of this covenant. This forces us to ask, was the founding of America merely a product of Enlightenment philosophy? Or was it the next chapter in the story of the Solomonic Pact? That question hangs in the air, hidden just beneath the rhetoric of liberty, unsettling and unanswered. Revolutions were not just spontaneous explosions of public anger. They were also carefully orchestrated performances, guided by individuals who understood that symbols are a form of power. Monarchies were shattered, but the symbols of the Solomonic Code lived on, finding new life on revolutionary banners, in new forms of architecture, and within new constitutions. A shaken Vatican could only watch as its old rival reappeared in a modern new disguise. Where the Church once feared secretive knights and lodges, it now faced entire nations that were infused with the very same hidden covenant. Its condemnation of Freemasonry only grew louder, but it was too late. The symbols had already spread too far, becoming part of the very identity of these new states. To get rid of them would have meant erasing whole nations from the map. The paradox is truly haunting. The very same code that helped build cathedrals under a papal blessing also guided the revolutions that sought to tear down the authority of both church and crown. How could a single covenant serve both total obedience and radical rebellion? The answer might be that its loyalty was never to an institution, but to a memory. The Solomonic Pact survived by adapting, aligning itself with whichever group could guarantee its continuity, whether they were knights, lodges, dynasties, or entire nations. The seat of power shifted, but the code was a constant, flowing like a secret river beneath the turbulent storms of history. The code's whispers could even be heard in the symbols of terror. Revolutionary festivals in France staged grand processions that were clear reflections of Masonic rites. The infamous cult of reason set up altars dedicated to geometry itself, swapping out statues of saints for symbols of divine proportion. While critics condemned it as atheism, the rituals looked remarkably similar to the initiatory ceremonies held in lodges, where light emerges from darkness and hidden knowledge is revealed. Looked at this way, the revolution was less a rejection of the sacred and more of a transfer of allegiance. It was a shift in loyalty away from Rome and toward a covenant far older, one that traces its origins all the way back to Solomon's Temple. To mainstream historians, these connections are merely a coincidence, the natural result of borrowing from a pool of symbols that were common at the time. And yet, the relentless persistence of these highly specific emblems, pillars, eyes, compasses, pyramids, seems to defy such a simple explanation. They shouldn't appear in such precise forms across so many different revolutions separated by oceans and contexts. But what if a single, hidden current guided them all, ensuring the Solomonic Pact remained alive even as thrones fell. Seen this way, revolutions are not endings, but transformations. They are moments when the covenant simply changes its vessel, cloaking itself in new language while holding on to its core essence. The Vatican watched with deepening fear as nations embraced symbols it had condemned for centuries. Silencing individuals was one thing, but how could it possibly silence an entire republic founded upon the imagery of the code itself? This began a new phase in the rivalry between Rome and the Solomonic Covenant. The conflict was no longer confined to secret orders or lodges. It was now infused into the very structure of states, which made suppression nearly impossible. The Pact had escaped its cage, embedding itself in the architecture of nations far beyond the reach of any decree. This begs the question, what does it mean that revolutions carried the mark of Solomon more than the mark of Christ? What covenant still shapes our world beneath the rhetoric of liberty and equality? Perhaps the true inheritance of these revolutions isn't freedom alone, but the continuity of an ancient pact that refuses to die. The symbols on flags and coins serve as a reminder that history's surface tells one story, while another flows just beneath, a story of a covenant, a code, and an allegiance older than kings, older than the Vatican, and older than the very nations it quietly shapes. Wars are often remembered as clashes of armies, banners, and ideologies. Yet, underneath the smoke and bloodshed, unseen hands work to shape their outcomes. From the Crusades to the Napoleonic campaigns, from the birth of republics to the redrawing of Europe's borders, a hidden presence leaves its mark, a pattern too subtle for most historians, yet too consistent to be accidental. This presence is the quiet hand of the Solomonic Pact. It is a covenant that doesn't shout, but guides, influencing rulers, councils, and treaties without ever revealing its name. Armies might march under the flag of a crown or a cross, but the geometry of their decisions and the alignment of their symbols betray another loyalty, one to a code flowing just beneath official history. The fall of the Templars should have ended their influence. However, within a century, the banking practices they pioneered were shaping European economies. While their symbols persisted on buildings and seals, did their knowledge just dissolve? Or did it simply shift hands, absorbed into new networks that carried the covenant silently into the Enlightenment? Freemasons famously filled the ranks of ministers, philosophers, and generals, and their influence on the revolutions of the 18th century was undeniable. Yet few recognized that these very upheavals followed the same geometry once traced in Solomon's temple. The pact didn't vanish in flames. It survived by adapting, guiding, and waiting. Consider the Congress of Vienna in 1815, when Europe's map was redrawn after Napoleon's fall. Officially, the great powers met to restore balance and suppress revolution. In reality, many of the key diplomats were Freemasons, sworn to oaths that transcended any national allegiance. Behind the polished diplomacy, the Solomonic Pact whispered its own agenda. Its influence secured not just treaties, but continuities, protecting networks that reached beyond monarchies and parliaments. The surface showed politics, but the depths revealed geometry, the same proportions shaping both cathedrals and kingdoms. The pact had no throne, yet its presence guided thrones nonetheless. The Vatican sensed this guiding hand, though it could rarely name it openly. Papal bulls condemning secret societies multiplied, but the condemnations themselves only revealed a deep frustration. How do you fight an enemy that is not an army, not a state, and not a visible order, but a current flowing through bloodlines, lodges, and monuments? The Church could denounce symbols, but those very symbols would then appear in the capitals of new nations. It could silence individuals, but entire governments would echo the covenant's imagery. The Solomonic Pact was everywhere and nowhere. Silent yet unbroken, it guided history like an invisible architect shaping walls unseen by the laborers who built them. The wars themselves bore its imprint. The American Revolution featured Masonic generals who fought under banners resonant with temple imagery. The French Revolution, steeped in Masonic symbolism, spread across Europe in armies that carried the language of liberty, but also the geometry of the covenant. Even Napoleon, though crowned by the Pope, filled his empire with symbols more Solomonic than Christian: pillars, stars, and eagles, with numbers echoing sacred proportions. Was he a conqueror, or was he merely an instrument? When he fell, the Pact did not. The Code simply endured, moving back into silence, awaiting its next vessel. Even in modern wars, the whispers continue. Monuments raised to victory carry compasses, squares, and eyes watching from stone. Memorials are aligned with the solstices. Cities rebuilt from rubble are laid out with proportions that echo ancient codes. Nations may rise and fall, but their monuments betray an allegiance to something older and more persistent. This is why the Pact is so elusive. It does not declare war or hold up banners. It guides invisibly, embedding itself in decisions, alignments, and symbols. Those who know how to look see its hand. Those who do not simply attribute outcomes to chance. To recognize this hidden hand is to understand why history often feels incomplete, why victories and defeats seem guided by forces left unnamed. The Solomonic Pact thrives in silence, influencing kings and rebels alike, and shaping treaties and revolutions without ever appearing in the records. Its power lies in being unseen, in guiding without revealing, in preserving continuity beneath the chaos. Armies may clash and crowns may fall, but the code, hidden in geometry, blood, and oath, endures. This leaves us with a haunting thought: perhaps no war is fought without its presence. Perhaps no treaty is signed without its shadow. Perhaps history itself is less the story of nations and more the stage upon which this pact moves, unseen yet decisive. The quiet hand of the Solomonic Covenant remains not in chronicles, but in the geometry of choices, steering humanity along paths it does not realize it walks. In fact, every trail within this maze of history seems to converge on one ultimate image: the unopened vault of Solomon, a sealed chamber where all the scattered fragments of this story finally meet. Persistent tales speak of a secret sanctuary, untouched by conquest, located deep beneath the Temple Mount. Its entrance is a secret held only by the guardians of the Covenant. The Knights Templar are said to have breached its walls, while the Freemasons have symbolically reconstructed it within their lodges. The Vatican, meanwhile, has harbored a deep fear of it, concealing any knowledge of its existence inside sealed archives. But what exactly is this vault, and what secrets does it hold? Is it filled with relics and scrolls, or does it contain the code itself, a language written not with ink, but with the very proportions of the universe, waiting for a reader who understands its grammar? Whispers describing such a chamber have endured through the ages. Some sources claim it safeguards the Ark of the Covenant, hidden away by priests who foresaw the coming destruction. Others describe manuscripts deemed too perilous for the world, detailing laws of geometry and harmony that would establish an authority far beyond Rome's reach. A third theory suggests the vault is less a physical room and more of a conceptual design, a sanctuary built not of stone, but of proportion, which has been replicated in cathedrals, monuments, and lodges around the globe. If that last theory is correct, then the vault has never truly been sealed. Every structure aligned to the heavens and every ritual performed in secret effectively becomes a new doorway. The unopened chamber in this light is less a specific location and more a living memory passed down through each generation sworn to the Pact. Even so, the sheer endurance of this story is unsettling. Why does the vision of a hidden vault reappear century after century? How does every effort to erase the Solomonic Covenant simply lead back to the idea of something precious being preserved in silence, waiting for the right moment? The answer may be that humanity instinctively knows a great discovery can never be unmade, only concealed, and that this very act of hiding it creates a form of continuity. The unopened vault is the ultimate symbol of the Pact's core promise: never destroyed, always hidden, and eternally awaiting its revelation. Official sources will tell you a different story. Archaeologists are quick to deny its existence, and theologians readily dismiss it as mere legend. Yet a counter-narrative is told through architecture, ritual, and bloodlines. Across Europe, ancient pillars seem to recall its entryway. In America, national monuments echo its sacred geometry. During every Masonic initiation, candidates symbolically step into its hallowed space. Even the Vatican, by locking its archives to any inquiry, seems to confirm with silence what it will not acknowledge with words. The vault is a paradox that resists being erased, existing everywhere and nowhere at once. Imagine if one day the chamber were finally uncovered. What would we find? Would it be gold and relics or something far more dangerous? It could be knowledge confirming that history has been deliberately rewritten, that our collective memory has been managed, and that the story of humanity is not what we have been led to believe. To open the vault would not just be to unearth artifacts. It would be to expose the invisible current that has been steering the course of centuries. Perhaps this is the very reason it remains sealed, and why its guardians protect it in silence. Some truths may simply be too disruptive, and some covenants too vast to ever be fully revealed. And so, our journey circles back to a haunting realization. The Solomonic Code, whether etched in scrolls, carved in stone, performed in ritual, or carried in blood, continues to be a living, breathing force in history. It was carried by the Templars from the depths of Jerusalem, preserved by the Freemasons in their lodges, and feared by the Vatican, which unwittingly enshrined it. Nations etched its signature onto their emblems. Revolutions raised its principles high on their banners. Dynasties carried its legacy within their very DNA, and today it waits in silence, a presence as potent as an unopened vault. This covenant was never designed for a single authority to control, nor could it be snuffed out by any official decree. It is memory itself, an unseen river flowing just beneath the surface of humanity's accepted narrative. We may never gain entry to Solomon's sealed chamber, but we are constantly standing on its doorstep. We brush against it every time we appreciate the geometric perfection of a cathedral, decode the emblems on a government seal, or recognize how ancient monuments mirror the stars. The vault, you see, isn't so much a location as it is a lingering influence, reminding us that behind the history we are taught, another, older memory is whispering through stone and silence. For this reason, the tale can have no conclusion. The vault's seal has not been broken, and as long as it holds, the Solomonic Code will silently continue its work, unseen but never broken, thriving in every fragment that has escaped deletion. The final door is never truly locked, the final chamber is never truly vacant. The covenant waits, and the silence around it endures. Our own journey now slows, like a torch flickering after a long trek through stone corridors. We've followed faint whispers across the ages, through condemned knights and accused lodges, through the rise of cathedrals and the collapse of empires. We have found this presence etched in stone and carried in blood. At every juncture, it has lingered, quiet, resilient, and refusing to be forgotten. The Solomonic Pact, whatever its ultimate form, persists as a memory hidden beneath history, quietly shaping the things that cannot be spoken aloud. No final word can ever seal it, because the code itself is designed to reject any neat conclusion. Its very survival depends on the questions it leaves unanswered, on the vaults that stay closed, and on the symbols most people look at but never truly see. To listen for its whisper is to step into a current far older than nations, crowns, or the faiths that try to contain it. One does not solve a mystery of this scale. One simply learns to walk within its shadow, training the eyes to see what lies concealed from the visible world. So let the story rest here, in the quiet, as if a candle has burned to its end. The chamber remains sealed, the code unbroken, the covenant alive. And in that stillness, we sense what history cannot tell us, that something vast and enduring still waits. Patient, unseen, shaping the edges of our world. The flame fades, yet the mystery remains, breathing softly through the dark. We have reached the edge of the map for tonight. The archives of Mythic Index are closing, but the history remains. If this journey offered you rest or realization, please leave a like before you go. Comment which era or myth you wish to explore in our next session. And subscribe to ensure the library doors are open for you again.